Canvas webinar. The business model canvas is basically a visual representation of the various elements of the business, which allows you to see the relationships among the various parts of the model. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the business model canvas. There are several variants. We'll look at a couple of examples so that you can see its power and value to an entrepreneur and also to an angel investor. Our agenda basically is going to look at it more so from the view of an entrepreneur in terms of how to build their business model and how they can refine it so that it's going to deliver its expectations in terms of receiving funding. We will also go through its genesis. It goes back a few years. And then we're going to talk about the lean canvas. The lean canvas is a more recent iteration, and it has power, particularly when we're trying to look at let's say, a new proposition. And then lastly is for the entrepreneurs, is how do I go about completing it timely and where I can see that I can validate it. And that would help us in terms of knowing that we would like to take that business model to the market. So one of the questions when I do workshops or give speeches like this is people say, well, what's the difference between a business model and a business model canvas? And so when we look at that, what I say is that a business model is basically a single diagram of your startup, and it depicts how you will serve customers and make money in a repeatable and scalable way. It improves the planning to bring the new product or the service to the market. And that in the time period that basically when you look at a business model is relatively immediate. We're talking less than a year. And it's mostly an internal document that's used by startups, but it may be expected by potential angel investors. If we look at a business plan, it's more a statement of goals, plans to meet the goals, and metrics to measure progress against the plan. And it's utilized to create a new or revitalize existing products and services to our existing customers or to go to a new market for an existing company. It's more future looking. Many of the business plans that perhaps you and I have been participated in large corporations, they may go out multiple years, some out to 3 or 5 years. So it's more of a planning document to bring people together. And it's used by companies and startups to communicate plans, to cascade goals to all of the employees. And it's expected by potential investors, and it may be more as an external communication piece with selected audiences. Okay, so what is the genesis of the business model canvas? Well, it was developed by Dr. Alexander Osterwalder, and it was published in his books. The books are on Amazon. One was called The Value Proposition Design, which was published in 2014. And the second one was Business Model Generation, which I've shown the cover here, and that was in 2010. The business model initial work was grounded in the lean startup movement. These books have now sold over 1 million copies and have been published in 37 languages. One noted publication found that, and they named the Business Model Generation among 12 best business books of all time. And the German edition was named the Management Book of the Year in 2011. The Business Model Canvas is now taught in hundreds of business schools globally, and it's growing. And they are rapidly becoming mainstream best practices, not only in the corporate innovation space, but also with startups. So what is the business model canvas? So the business model canvas is a visual representation of the various elements of the business model, and it allows you to, first, I would say, is see the relationships among the parts of the model. You can identify hypotheses, you can make assumptions and see where there might be risk. You can do plan validation. The plan validation testing would largely, could come in terms of a minimum viable product. You could do various price tests with different types of customers. And you can find ways to add value or to reduce cost. And then you can brainstorm market disruption strategies with your team. So the business model canvas that was developed by Mr. Osterwalder enables both new and existing businesses to determine how to create and deliver and capture value. It includes the following steps. So we're going to start off with a certain sequence that he developed. So we'll start off with the far right, which is customer segments. And basically what we're looking at here is which customers are we attempting to serve, and which activities are going to be carried out by my customers as part of my products or services. Next, we would look at the value proposition. So what is the value that I'm offering these customers? And what does the customer achieve by using my product or service? We would then look at the channels. And there, what we're looking for is how we're going to reach these customers that we're targeting. And is this personal or digital or via social media would be examples of channels. We then would look at customer segments. So what kind of customer relationships do I enter into with my customers? And how do I gain and retain customers would be a second important question. We would then move to revenue streams. What are the customers willing to pay and how would they pay? Is this a SaaS subscription model? Are they taking ownership of the product or are they leasing and so on? We would then look at key resources. Key resources would be either in terms of money, it could be activities that are costly that we've outsourced. And these would be the activities that are actually creating the value. We would look at key partners. So there may be key partnerships that are necessary or that we should be developing in order to create value faster or in an accelerated manner. And then we would look at the cost structure. That would be the last one after we have each of these other elements. And there, what we're looking at is, are these fixed costs? Are they recurring costs? Are they variable costs? Are they one-off kind of cost? And that would help us to develop the financials for our venture. There's another way of looking at the business model canvas, and this is just one of many iterations. Here it's color-coded so that you can see desirability, feasibility, viability. So Osterwalder basically argues that the business models operate in a certain context. Therefore, the following areas need to be mapped out around your business model canvas. And so he would call these various environmental maps. So as an example, one that we could talk about would be market forces. So these would be key customer issues that are in our area, such as growing or shrinking segments, customer switching costs, changing jobs, pains and gains. Another one that the team could look at, and this is all given what industry or sector that they're in and what type of customers they're serving, would be key trends. So these would be key trends that would be shaping the arena that we're going to operate in, such as technology innovations. Could be regulatory constraints. It could be social trends. A third area could be industry forces. And we're going to talk about a few later on in the presentation, specifically in banking with fintech, and also in terms of looking at very large multi-sided platforms like Amazon. So in terms of industry forces, we would look at the key actors that are in our space, such as competitors, rising value chain actors, or new or fading technology providers. We should also look at macroeconomic forces. These could be global market conditions. As an example, Brexit is causing a lot of change and opportunity for certain players. Access to resources, or dramatically changing commodity prices, like, say, natural gas today. So the business model canvas can help, when you look at these various forces, to clarify your product and service desirability, feasibility, and then the financial visibility. So we're going to look at each of these now in more detail. And I'm going to provide a lot of color, and we'll do it two ways. So one is what I'm showing on the screen now is if we were running a workshop, the team would answer these questions. And then when they answered those questions, they would put together a sticky note, and then we'll put it up on the business model canvas. So if we look at customer segments, what we really want to look at here is it's the various sets of customers that can be segmented based on their different needs and attributes. So as an example, we may say that it's mass market. So that would, an example there would be is Amazon. They want to reach all customers, not just certain customers. We could have a niche market. So now the customer segmentation would be very specific. For example, if we were at Rolex, we're targeting perhaps high income customers. We could be looking at something that's very segmented. And in this situation, the business may have to further distinguish its clients based on gender, age, and income. We might look at diversify. So here the business services multiple customer segments, and they may have different needs and characteristics. Or we could have a multi-sided platform. So for a smooth day-to-day business operation, some companies will serve mutually dependent customer segments. So an example here would be a credit card company that provides services to credit card holders while simultaneously assisting merchants who accept those credit cards. Let's move to value proposition. So Osterwalder would argue that the value proposition is a collection of products and services a business offers to meet the needs of its customers. So according to him, a company's value proposition is what distinguishes itself from its competitors. And the value proposition provides value through various elements, such as newness, performance, customization, and getting the job done would be examples. Or perhaps it's an improved price point. Maybe there's risk reduction, and also convenience and usability would be various types. These value propositions could be quantitative. That's normally how we would look at it, like, say, price or efficiency of use. Or it could be qualitative. And the qualitative might be the overall customer experience and outcome that the customer is expecting. Let's look at channels. So typically in terms of channels, our venture may use one or more channels to reach its targeted customers. So an effective channel would distribute the company's value proposition in ways that are fast, that are efficient, and that they're cost effective. But an organization may want to reach its clients through multiple channels so that it becomes known quicker. So we may have a storefront, and in the digital world, this would be our website. We may have a partner channel, which could be a major distributor, or we can have a combination of both. And we'll see variations of that in some examples that I will show later. Let's look at customer relationships. So to ensure the survival and success of any business, companies must identify the type of relationship that they want to create with their customers. That element should address three critical customer relationship steps. And when I do due diligence on some startups, what I find is that they may skip one of these steps. So the first step is how the business is going to get new customers. The second would be is how the business is going to keep those customers purchasing and using its services. And then the third one is how the business is going to grow its revenue from these customers. So all three are very important to grow revenue and to maintain that revenue and to keep churn down. Now, there are a number of ways of doing this. So the company, the new venture, would have to determine, are we going to do this through personal assistance? And so this would be where it's going to be more high-touch customer interaction. Obviously, that one would be one of the more expensive approaches. We could do some dedicated personal assistance, but maybe it's more limited. It could be intimate, it could be hands-on, but maybe just by exception. We could do self-service. So the self-service could translate from an indirect interaction between the company and its clients. And you can see this through a website or maybe a chat bot. And so here the organization will use various tools to try to keep close to the customers and to see are they being satisfied. We could have more automated services. So in terms of more automated services, an example of this would be Amazon making book suggestions based on the characteristics of my previous book purchases. We could have a community, and through a blog, the community could show direct interactions among various clients in the company. And the company platform produces a scenario where knowledge can be shared and problems are solved between different clients. We could have co-creation. This is a personal relationship that's created through the customer's direct input to the final outcome of the company's products. Now we're going to look at the revenue streams. So first up, in terms of looking at revenue streams, is what Osterwalder would call as an asset sale. So this is where we're selling the ownership rights to the physical good. And this is what typically a retail company does. We go in there, we purchase a product, so we're taking ownership of the product. The second one could be a usage fee. So this is money generated from the use of a particular service. So an example would be is when we send something by UPS. So UPS would charge a fee. We could have a subscription fee. So this would be revenue generated by selling access to a service. A good example of that would be Netflix. We could lend, lease, or rent. So we're given the exclusive right for a particular period of time. Leasing a car is a good example. We could license. So this is revenue generated from charging for the use of the protected intellectual property. We could have a brokerage fee. Revenue generated from an intermediate service between two parties. So brokers selling a house for a commission is an example. Another one would be advertising. Revenue generated from charging fees for the product advertising. And a good example of that would be the ads on Facebook. Let's go to key resources. So here, what we're looking at is the resources that are necessary to create the value for the customer. So these would be considered assets to the company that are needed to sustain and support the business. So these resources could be human, they could be financial, they could be physical, and they could be intellectual. Key activities is next. And here, what we're looking at is what are the important, in fact, the most important activities in executing the company's value proposition. So as an example, if we were making pins, as a manufacturer, we would want to create an efficient supply chain to drive down costs over time. And now let's look at key partners. And here, what we'd like to do is we want to look at optimizing the operations and reducing the risk of the business model. And organizations usually will try to cultivate buyer-supplier relationships so that they can focus on their core activity. Complementary business alliances also can be considered through joint ventures or strategic alliances between various companies. We're going to explore this element in more detail to show the power of key partners. And our last one is cost structure. And here what we want to look at is the most important monetary consequences when we go about operating under different business models. So when we look at classes of business structures, one type would be cost-driven. And if it's cost-driven, the business model would focus on minimizing all costs and not having any frills. So a good example of that would be, say, like a low-cost airline. Another approach in terms of cost structure would be value-driven. Here, we're less concerned with costs. This business model would focus on creating value for products and services. As an example, Rolex watch. But when we look at each of these different types, there are characteristics that we need to be mindful of. For example, one characteristic would be fixed costs. And here are the fixed costs. What we're looking at is costs that are unchanged across different applications. So for example, the rent for our facility would be constant and would be fixed for a long period of time. We could have variable costs, and these would be costs that are going to vary across the amount of production of goods and services. So as an example, if we were to run a music festival, it would vary in terms of how many people that attend that musical festival or how many music festivals that we actually run. We would look at economies of scale. So costs would go down, ideally, as the amount of goods are ordered and produced go up. And then there's economies of scope. So costs would go down due to incorporating other businesses which have the direct relation to our product and how that product is used. All right, so now that we've covered the theory and what the elements are of a business model canvas, let's look at Netflix. And I find this one highly interesting. And when I share this in various workshops, we spend a lot of time on this. For today, we're just going to look at one area of Netflix, but I will show you the whole business model canvas. So when we look at the important elements of a subscription business model, and that's what Netflix is, the kinds of things that we would look at would be as the crucial financial metrics. So an example here, we would want to look at the contribution margin from each time that Netflix is getting a new user in terms of the amount of that fee. And we would like to look at their free cash flows. They put a lot of money into content, and so that would impact free cash flow. We would also want to look at crucial metrics. So as an example here, we would look at the lifetime value of a user and also the customer acquisition costs. What's also important here would be scale. And obviously Netflix had to scale across the country and across the world. And so these would be key things that would be important to looking at the Netflix business model. So let's actually look at their business model canvas. And this was put together by Dr. Murat Ulu. And what he did here is he basically described on the business model canvas for Netflix the key things if you were to analyze it today. So what I would like to focus in on for today's discussion is the key partners, which you see on the left side. When I work with various startups, they'll usually think of key partners as we have described its definition, such as channels. So a distributor would be an example. But here, it's important to look at the power and the potential that Netflix developed with their key partners. So we're going to go through each of these on the key partners. First, content. So here, what they were able to do is to develop a very broad and deep range of content. These are shows and movies that they acquired or had license to from third parties. Second is the internet service providers. This was critical for them to compete with the TV stations, ABC, CBS, and also companies like Comcast. And so it was very important in the early days that the government would allow net neutrality so that they could stream over the top. Third is Amazon Web Services. Almost all of the Netflix IT is hosted on Amazon Web Services. This is from a functionality perspective. It is not from a content perspective. Next, this is the filmmaker guilds and individuals. The directors, the actors, the writers, and their guilds and unions are some of the most powerful players in the US film industry. So this helped Netflix to expand. Cinemas, theaters. There was a ban on Netflix films at the Cannes Film Festival, which was a consequence of the French cinema owners' protest against Netflix practice not to show their content on theater screens. But Netflix turned that negative into a positive by actually making an interesting move by acquiring one and more of the title winners at the Cannes Film Festival. Prizes and film festivals. So these are strong promoters and influencers in the industry, and they help get the word out. You have other influencers, magazines, TV shows, and others covering the film industry, and that gave free promotion and or you could say criticism of the film, which may have helped the use of seeing films by users on the Netflix platform. You also have IP holders such as Marvel and others who can license their IP to Netflix so that they can create even more content. And then you have regulators. So this was really helpful in terms of on the topic of net neutrality. And then lastly, you have investors. So why are they a key partner? Well, Netflix had put a lot of money into building their content, particularly as companies like Disney removed their content from that platform and created their own platform. So this created a very major partner in terms of money to help fund Netflix as it expanded its content. Let's take a different example. So we're going to move now to the what I'm going to call as a banking example for Gen X. Let's say this is for older people. So if you look at the banking business model, this has been around forever. But it wasn't until like the 1400s where the model for the modern bank was derived. And it was a concept of deposits and custody of assets that paved the way for what I'll call is the core banking business today. And that's what they call as net interest margin. And that's the difference between what the bank pays their depositors, savings rates, and the price that they loan out money to would-be creditors, so loans, mortgages, and so on. So in theory, more money that the banks bring into deposits, the more they can lend out. However, banks can also use this liability, the money that they owe you and I from our deposit, to create an income generating asset by using the deposits as collateral to issue an interest paying loan. More recently, what's happened is there's been a great race for assets that has brought innovation and disruption to banking. So what would a fintech bank business model look like, and how would that be different than the one that we're presently looking at? So here's an example of a business model canvas for, let's say, Generation Z. Here is very different. So what you find is that newish fintechs like Sophie are now in the banking game, and they're applying the same model as the banks, but slightly different branding. So instead of depositors, we now have members. And while the next gen money apps like Cash App by Square or Venmo are beginning to enter the banking fray through their community-driven digital payment apps, they're basically using a very different approach. It's not looking at just eyeballs. What they're looking for is assets under management, growth, and fat net interest margins. So, and this ensures the banking profitability extends into our current digital era. So some big tech companies like Square and even Shopify are very well capitalized. And they're so well capitalized that it's enough that they can stand to launch their own respective banking and fintech products. But they may need more capital depending on the specific banking strategy that they choose. So what we're seeing now is a lot of people moving into this area because it's very lucrative, particularly when young people would like to bank using an app on their iPhone. All right, so normally when I give this kind of seminar, it's part of a 1 day or a half a day working with a entrepreneur and their team to develop the business model canvas. So how do we do this? Well, we would assemble into teams, typically 2 or 3, it depends on the number of people in the startup. And we would create the canvas by writing key messages on sticky notes and placing them on the canvas. When each team is done, they would present to the other team. And then we would then have a discussion. And then from that discussion, we would do a compare and contrast. And typically what that then does is it notes gaps. It notes where we want to add content as appropriate. And then what we then do is we merge the two together. And then what we find is that we now have an acceptable canvas that everyone has bought into. So it's great in terms of getting buy-in and ownership and then moving forward and re-energizing the team. Now, when we finish with that, what we don't yet have is validation of that business model. So then the key question comes up is, well, how do I validate the business model? So the problem that I mostly work with startups is that they fall in love with the solution too early. And it's easy to do. I found myself in that own situation. So when that happens is what the startups have to realize is that they have to sufficiently focus on the product and market fit to make certain that the targeted customers want and will use that proposed product and service. And so when we look at that, we have to say everything that we've done to date in terms of filling out this business model canvas, if we don't have a minimum viable product that a customer has used, is that it's basically a hypothesis. So what we then say to ourselves is, all right, well, then how do we validate these hypotheses? Well, there are 3 ways of doing that. So one is discovery. And in terms of the discovery, that's where we collect our own data. A second would be research. And then we're looking at other people's data. And a third would be testing. This is where we have simulation and using our minimum viable product out in the marketplace. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to uncover the disrupt. So when I say uncover the disrupt, there are basically 4 disrupts that I want to share with you. So one is the offer. And so this would be our new offer in terms of our startup. And it basically is providing something that did not exist up to this time. So we would consider that an invention. A second type of disrupt would be process. So this is a new product or method that allows the offer to be produced faster, cheaper, more durable, better quality. A third type of offer would be in the marketplace. It's opening a new market segment that's poorly served until now by making minor modifications to one's product or service. So we would do a lot of marketing here, and that's what we would call this one. And then the last one is value. It's meeting a need that is valued by the existing market, but not satisfactorily met by competing offers, and doing it better than the competition. And so that positions us nicely in the marketplace. And what we would then do is we would iterate the business model expectations until we can see that they're being realized. And this is what we would then call as a proof of concept in the marketplace. There is an iteration on the business model canvas, and it's called What is Lean Canvas? And this has its value, and so we're going to go through a couple examples, and I will show the differences with Lean Canvas versus the original business model canvas. And what you see here in terms of the numbers it's the actual sequence that we go through when we develop it. So here, the Lean Canvas it enables entrepreneurs and startups to quickly validate their business idea following the principles of a lean startup. The canvas is made for each customer segment that you've identified and validated. It includes the following steps, and it's in this prescribed order. One is customer segments. And so here, what we want to focus on is the completely new proposition that we've come up with. And it's useful to know where we can find these, what I'll call early adopters. This group is part of a final larger customer segment. Second is then we go to the problem. Here, what we'd want to do is focus on solving problems that are really worthwhile. So when I run a workshop, I would say, please describe your top 3 problems that the customer has to deal with and that you want to solve. We would then go to the solution. And here, this is what often we would all get excited about and we work hard for. And here we want to deliberately focus in on only the customer segments and their problems that we find is the most important and where we think is going to be the biggest value. Next is the value proposition. So here we want a convincing plan or offer that solves the customer's problems. We then move to the revenue stream. And here we want to particularly focus in on the model for the revenue streams, and the pricing. Then we move to channels, and it be, okay, for this new proposition, which channels do we use to get to the customer? We then look at how we're going to measure success. We're going to measure it in terms of customer actions that are important to the customer. Is it going to be a financial metric? So we need to determine the right metrics to make sure that we are not making decisions based on irrelevant data. We then look at the cost. Are they fixed, variable, and how do they compare with the standards that we would want to establish so that we can make money? And then the last one is the unfair advantage. How is our organization going to create an offer that cannot easily be copied by others? And how do we arm ourselves against the competition? So here, what I have done is I'm going to compare and contrast the business model canvas with lean canvas. And we're going to look at the following key areas. So one is purpose. So lean canvas is much more targeted. It quickly helps defining a business model for one particular segment. Let's look at different elements. The lean canvas focuses on the problem, alternatives, solution, key metrics, unfair advantage, and focuses in on the early adopters. When do I apply? The business model canvas is a quick way to build the value proposition, but the lean canvas is best used on a really new initiative. So what I hope that becomes clear here is that each of these canvases have their own value, and they have focus on different elements. So how do I complete the lean canvas? So we would use a similar approach that I described earlier for the business model canvas, but this canvas can be created faster because typically we're looking at an iteration of our business model as one example, or we're looking at honing in on a new customer segment. And so it can be done faster. All right, so what I'd now like to move into is there are a number of multi-billion-dollar startups, and so what we'd like to do is explore their lean canvas. And the reason that would be useful is we could see how what would seem to be a simple idea turned into something that became very, very large. So we're going to use two fundamental requirements when choosing the companies. So first, we're going to pick only unicorn startups. Second is we're going to pick companies founded before the lean startups first release, which was in 2011. And we're going to look at two different types of startup companies, one that's invention-based and another one that would be money-driven. So as an example, the founders of Facebook, YouTube, and Google initially did not focus on making money. They were just having fun in inventing a solution or technology to make human life better. Amazon and Airbnb, on the other hand, were originally profit-oriented startups. Their founders set money as the primary goal of their endeavors. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to look into filling in the blanks of a lean canvas, and we're going to start with Google. So here you have Google, founded in 1998, Menlo Park, California. Founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin. The funding total was $36 million. They did an IPO in 2004, raised $1.7 billion. In terms of popularity and global adoption, Google is the undisputed #1 company. Originally, it was a web search engine. It grew into a global giant specializing in online ads, cloud computing, and products. Google's bootstrapping started in a garage where there were two free-thinking minds that wanted to implement their Stanford University knowledge. Seeing gaps in Excite and Yahoo research, they created a reliable and speedy search engine. Their collaboration strategy, synergy, resulted in what's called page rank algorithm, and that was their unfair advantage. They attempted to sell the technology. They went to companies and said, you could have this technology for $1 million. Remember that, $1 million. But that strategy failed. No competitor had interest. So they pivoted and they took their research project and made it a startup. Andy Bechtolsheim saw the algorithm value and he invested $100,000. So today Google's value, depending on the stock price, is $2.6 trillion. So let's look at this, if you take a look at the business model canvas here, the early adopters were Stanford students. Their customer segment was all web users. And then the problem that they were trying to solve is when you and I now Google, we want the data to come up to be something that's relevant and it's going to solve what I'm searching for. So their page ranking system did that. And that was something that people really liked, and it then took off. You got a fast search, you got the information that you wanted. Let's look at Amazon. Amazon was founded in 1994. Founder was Jeff Bezos. Total funding was $8 million. 1997 IPO raised $54 million. Originally an online bookstore, activities included e-commerce, cloud computing, and even artificial intelligence. Amazon was founded right in the middle of the dot-com bubble and was lucky to survive the following crash. Its story also began in the garage. The initial startup capital was the personal savings of Bezos' parents. At this period, web usage was growing at lightning speed, and most entrepreneurs wanted to ride the internet wave. So this is how the Amazon Lean Canvas might have looked back in 1994. So originally, Jeff Bezos wanted to do what he has today, which was to have everything on his website. But he eventually brought it down to just book readers. And he then focused on just the early adopters. These were customers that are searching for rare and specialized books, and the internet users looking for book selling services. So he solved that problem because basically he became a wholesaler. And then since he had the internet, he had a large number of customers versus a small bookstore that's serving basically local people. And he expanded from there by adding each of the different segments of products. Okay, so let's take this now to where would our startup, if we were doing one, would be at risk? Well, what I find is that when I follow up with startups that I've worked with, I would ask them these questions. So do your customers want it? And the way I can test that is looking at the revenue versus revenue projections. Second question I would ask is our product and service materially different from alternatives? And there we can see is how well we're doing versus competitors. Third, are there reasonably high barriers to imitation? So if not, what we're going to see is we're going to see people fast copying what we've tried to do. Next is how can we plan to stay continually ahead? So if we've innovated, we may have to innovate even faster. Do the revenue and cost numbers work at scale? So we may find that our approach is not as scalable as we thought. Will it withstand a pressure test? So pressure tests basically come as, let's say we've received funding. And so now have we been able to achieve the milestones with the funding that we received? If not, we're going to have to go back to the investors for additional funding. So we would want to understand, okay, what didn't work, why didn't it work, and what we're going to do about that. Are we willing to put in the work required in terms of taking the startup to the next level? So basically, I find is that there's some long, deep conversations in that space. And then where are we likely to break down? And so that's where we basically are looking for is what is the weakest link in our business model. So today, we basically, in this seminar, we've tried to show the concept of the lean startup, had it in terms of bearing fruit, in terms of using this business model canvas. We've shown different iterations of it and their value, and we've shown examples, and you can see the power of how these very large companies have leveraged key partners as one example, or the internet, or continuing to innovate faster than anyone else. So you can see that when you develop a business model canvas, it can really get a lot of buy-in from across the our startup employees. And it's a good example of how we can develop a business model quickly versus what we started with is a business plan that many large corporations use. So this is a good example of the power of a business model. So we'll now open it up to questions.
Thank you, Bob, very much. That was really, really very informative. I learned a lot, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. I really appreciate the examples about the big companies. That's really good. It's, you know, just learning how they pivoted and what they've done. That's really great. All right, Andre, very informative. Any questions from anyone? If you want to ask the question live, just raise your hand and I will bring you in, and then you can ask it via voice or video and audio. Please let me know, or you can put your questions in the Q&A section. That would help a lot. Gerard Miller has a question for you. He said, Bob, have you seen any research on the success and failure rate of companies that need to go back for more money after failing to meet milestones?
Excellent question, Gerard. I have not seen research. I have searched for research. Most of the data that I have is from fellow entrepreneurs and angel investors, and also academics that I stay in touch with, in particular at MIT, Babson, and Tuck School of Business. And what they'll say is that when they have worked with entrepreneurs in terms of pivoting, that they have found the business model canvas highly effective to understand what they did, what happened, what went wrong, and then what to do next.
All right, Bob, we have a question from Andre. It's in the Q&A. I can read it if you want.
Please.
It says, we are a medtech startup and have completed a healthcare lean canvas that we are constantly updating. Any advice on how to maximize our use of it as we move forward, or any caution that you may give in how we use it?
So that's a really good question. So I would point out, I would say two things. One is it's good that you're iterating, and what you want to do when you do the iteration is to make certain that that pivot, you understand why you're doing it, what its impact is, that you document that, and that you measure that. So from that pivot, you should have a key performance indicator that you have set a goal, that you're monitoring on some kind of frequency. And that way you understand and you'll be able to see that your pivot is working. And if it isn't, that's my second point, then there's two things that you could look at. So the first would be is perhaps the action that you took didn't give you the desired result. And so perhaps it's going to take a different action by the customers, as an example. Or the other part would be is that perhaps it's going to take more investment to address what the customer is looking for. And that would help you to understand, is this something that's going to be viable, depending on the amount of investment or the time it's going to take to implement, or the time for the customer to respond.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions? Anyone, raise your hand, come speak live. You're live on YouTube as well, too. We're broadcasting live, and here is Sandy. All right, Sandy. Oh, you dropped your hand. Okay, here we go, Sandy. Hey, Sandy, unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So I have a couple of technologies that I'm trying to apply to a specific marketplace. And what I found, I think is a good strategy is rather than pivot is to focus. And so what I've been trying to do is looking at this market segment is to find what else can I offer to this market segment to make them successful rather than to focus on my initial product offering.
So, Sandy, what would your question be?
So I was, in other words, what I'm doing is I'm broadening the offering to my market segment rather than narrowing it down. I'm broadening it so that it's harder for people to compete.
I see.
So is your question then, how would I use the business model canvas to measure the impact of that or the value of that?
Yeah, and also from your perspective, is that a reasonable strategy?
So I would say that would be use of the lean canvas, because we have a hypothesis. We're changing the value proposition. We could do this quickly in terms of trying to measure its impact, which would be our hypothesis. And then what you could then do is say, okay, how would I do this? Either through a minimum viable product. How would I gather data to see if this is going to have some value? Perhaps that's customer interactions with a select set of customers. And then you would then validate that hypothesis. In your case, you may want to look at customer interactions. You could also do it with product if it wasn't going to cost a lot. Perhaps you would have a prototype. So cost would be a factor there in terms of which approach you want to take, or access to specific customers that you're targeting would also be a factor in which how you would select how you want to do that.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Sandy. All right. Anyone else? Nobody else, it looks like. Okay, well, going once, going twice, going 3 times, no takers. All right, Bob, thank you so much for the wonderful webinar and very useful and informative. Like I said, I did learn a lot. I've seen so many presentations and businesses in the past decade or so, and I keep learning. So I truly appreciate your input today.
You're most welcome, JJ.
All right, everyone, we'll see you next week. And then, like we said, the competition will start on the 19th with live pitching to investors. Thank you very much. And please don't miss the webinars next week. If you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, it would be great. Thank you very much.